Have you ever heard of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? It's a film franchise that used to be a staple of fun, creative filmmaking with a bunch of laughs and suspense and very stylized action scenes, and it was all tightly written into a story that connected each film to each other and led to an overarching final endgame. Nowadays, you'll find that the franchise has kind of devolved into the exact opposite. It's pointless, directionless, and confusing. What was once a focused franchise that was clever and full of fun has just become a disjointed, dumb franchise that spends more of its time making bad jokes and becoming a joke itself. And if I had to sum up every single problem with the current state of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I could say it in about 5 words. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantum Mania. You see, Quantum Mania is basically the epitome of what happens when a film has no creative direction whatsoever. It's like the filmmakers took every single boring, overdone trope and decided to put it in a blender. And while I could go on for hours dissecting this film for every single flaw, which would pretty much be everything in the movie, there are a few main points that I want to touch on that really drag this movie down and are a good example of why most Marvel movies are just terrible anymore. It's no secret that Disney has been using its movies and TV shows to fight the good fight of social justice while also bringing attention to some very important matters. And do you know what's really cool? It's that Disney came up with this writing tactic called Tell, Don't Show. It's very clever how the writers behind Quantumania decided to give Scott Lang a giant monologue at the beginning of the movie that pretty much fills the audience in on everything they need to know before the movie gets started. This way, the movie can save time rather than wasting it on pointless things like character development. There's absolutely no need to show everybody or prove to them that Hope is a very smart businesswoman who cares about the environment when we can just have Scott Lang tell everybody that she is. I mean, I'm not sure why Scott even had to bring up the fact that she's helping the environment when it has absolutely nothing to do with the movie. Does anybody remember the time when Marvel movies had a little something called setup and payoff? The most setup and payoff we get in this movie is when a little jello creature gets envious of Scott Lang's body holes. This is paid off in the third act when this little jello creature runs into open fire, resulting in him too having holes in his body. As dumb as that sounds, it's still better than the setup and payoff that we get with Cassie Lang's character. You see, we first see Cassie in a prison cell, which her father has to come and get her out of. Is it because after 5 years of having no father there for her as a role model that she decided to model her life off of her father's past life of crime? Don't be silly, of course not. Cassie Lang is a true saint, you see. She's always looking out for the little guy. What really happened was Cassie was standing up for a bunch of homeless people who lost their homes due to the blip. And you see, cops just don't like homeless people, and apparently shoot tear gas into crowds of peaceful protesters who are protesting for homeless people. Geez, Marvel, I know you're a fictional franchise, but I think you really took fiction to the next level on this one. Because the cops were so evil and getting so out of control, Cassie just had to step in and be the hero. And so what does she do? She decides to do illegal things like shrinking cop cars. And of course, being the morally righteous person that she is, she gives the cop car back to them, but it's still shrunk, so it's useless. There's a few $1,000s of government assets down the drain. Well done, Cassie. You're really helping those homeless people. I wonder whose tax dollars are going to go to paying for the next cop car instead of, paying for houses for the homeless. And of course, this part of the movie is so important that we get to hear about it instead of actually seeing it. I mean, doesn't it just fire you up and inspire you more to help homeless people and fight against evil cops by listening to a snarky, self-entitled teenager talk about how evil they are? You know, if Disney, Marvel, and the writers behind this movie actually cared as much about the topic as they pretend to, then they could have actually worked it into the plot in a meaningful way. Take the Dark Knight trilogy, for example, or The Batman, which touch on issues like corrupt cops and how violence against criminals isn't always the best way to make society better. But Mr. Film Boss, you might say, don't you know that this scene with Cassie and the police was foreshadowing how she was going to be so passionate and involved with the revolution in the quantum realm? I definitely picked up on the fact that Kang's soldiers were supposed to be a representation of what cops are like in our society, but it just doesn't work on any level. The whole revolution was kind of a dumb plot point anyway, because it doesn't actually have anything to say. It's just a bunch of quantum people revolting against the dictatorship known as the Kang Dynasty. The whole Cassie versus the cops scene and the mention of Hope aiding in reforestations are just prime examples for how Disney just randomly plops in political or social views into their movies without affecting the plot in any way. It's not the first time that Disney has shoehorned their morality into Marvel movies for no reason whatsoever. Even when it retcons previous films, such as in Thor Love and Thunder, when we find out that Korg was born from two dads, despite the fact that Ragnarok already told us that he has a mom. How about the fact that we just had to know that Valkyrie was into women? What about that pointless scene from Doctor Strange 2, where we find out that America Chavez has two moms? How does this affect the plot? It doesn't in any way. The mothers are never seen or heard from again in the rest of the movie, and the scene doesn't even further explain how or why America can travel the multiverse. I mean, other than the fact that she was scared by a bumblebee. I miss the days when Marvel movies actually told important, meaningful stories. Like Iron Man, where Tony Stark has to confront himself about the fact that by making weapons of mass destruction, he wasn't making peace or protecting people, he was just making it easier for people to kill each other. And Captain America, the Winter Soldier, which dives into the idea of an organization or government that allows itself to be infiltrated, becoming the very thing that it was supposed to fight against. It's sad to see how far Marvel has fallen. They used to tell stories that had real meaning, real moral purpose, but anymore, they just like to pretend that they do without putting in any work. Half the time, the morals that they try to teach aren't even real morals, and most of the time, they're only there to fill in a small segment of the movie, while the rest of the movie is just dumb nonsense. Why is this happening? Why more and more are Marvel movies just becoming fluff and no stuff? We'll talk about that more in the next part. Thank you everybody for watching. This has been Luke Filmboss, and I'll see you all back here for part 2 of Everything Wrong with the MCU.